Keir Starmer appears on the face of it to have lied to Parliament about the grooming gang inquiry. And I'll tell you why you might think so in this video. So please do subscribe if you like this brutally honest approach and analysis of what is said by our government, because it really matters. So I've been alerted by many of you by email and comments left under my videos to an article and a video by Raja Miah. I'll link this article below. You can go back and tell him that I've seen it, and here's the video at his request. This article and his video references Prime Minister's questions, obviously an answer from Keir Starmer. It references the Casey report by Baroness Casey about the grooming gang and the inquiry that it recommends. And of course, her comments about it in oral evidence for the Home Affairs Committee for the implementation of the independent inquiry into what happened. Now, I'm going to pull up both the Hansard record of what Keir Starmer said in response to Kemi Badenoch's question to him. Kemi Badenoch asked him, why is it that this does not deserve a judge? And you can hear Keir Starmer's answer because many of these things now find their way into video, but you can also follow along with the Hansard transcript on the left-hand side. Hansard is a written record of everything said in Parliament, so there's never any ambiguity as to what was said, but you can watch and hear it for yourself. You can follow along with the text on the left, and then I'll tell you what Raja Miah brought up, which I looked into, which makes this look a little bit dishonest, if I'm being perfectly blunt about it. Let's have a listen to the question and what Keir Starmer said.
Unlike most of the inquiries going on, why is it that this inquiry doesn't deserve a judge?
Prime Minister.
Can I answer that? It's a serious point, Mr. Speaker, because whether it should be judge-led was looked at by Louise Casey, and she decided against that for a reason, and her reasons were twofold. I'll spell them out. The first was the speed with which we could do this, and it would have been... They asked the question, and the first was the speed with which we could do this. The second is really important, and that is that at the same time as the inquiry, I was absolutely determined that criminal investigations would go on at the same time. One of the problems that judge-led inquiries run into, I've seen and experienced this myself, is that they're often held back until the end of the criminal investigations. And I was determined that we'd be able to run the two together. And it's because of that, Mr. Speaker, that we've been able to reopen 1,200 historic cases at the same time.
So, just to be clear, Keir Starmer said here, quite clearly, unequivocally, he said that this, whether it was judge-led, was looked at by Louise Casey, and he said that she decided against it for a reason, and the reasons were twofold. Now, this is not entirely correct, because me being that guy who does look at the documents and does read through, I do read the small print. Sometimes it's literally my job to read the small print. There is small print. There's a lot of print in this report here, the Casey report, none of which refers to this being judge-led at all, much less precluding it from being judge-led. The one thing that it does say about who should look into these things is on page 12 at the end of the executive summary, where it says, as a result of this audit, I will insist that the cases of these women are looked into and not by those who are part of the problem. She said, I can only thank them and offer an apology on behalf of us all. This audit's been conducted with the victims front and centre of my mind. What she did not say in that report is that she'd concluded that it should not be judge-led. She didn't say anything of the sort. She didn't really consider that at all in that report, to be quite honest. There's very little reference to judge at all. Now, then we can come to this page here, which is the oral evidence for the implementation of an independent inquiry into this abuse, jumping around the algorithm, obviously. Now, she was asked about certain things in here, and one of which did involve whether or not it would be a judge-led inquiry. Now, this is where, if there is any defence of Keir Starmer, it's this, in that he could be basing his answer on what she said here, which is not entirely the same thing. So would you go so far as to say he lied to Parliament, or is he bending the truth, twisting the truth, or is it just a vague interpretation of what she said. Now, you can make up your own mind as to which one of those you think it is. Now, the question here from Joannie Reid was, do you have any thoughts about whether the National Inquiry should have official input from devolved governments so that we can get the broad brush learning across the UK? Now, importantly, this talked about devolved just means different parts of the country control themselves and they have different rules. They implement different rules and analysis and everything in various parts of the country. Now, the key thing here was that if they do one thing, let's say in Scotland, and somebody leaves the Scottish jurisdiction and moves somewhere else, that might have implications for the inquiry as a whole. So with that in mind, Baroness Casey then said this in response. She said, I would be disappointed if the opportunity of the national criminal investigation was missed because, let's face it, I can move from Scotland to England pretty easily and criminals do. Another missed opportunity alongside that would be at least the learnings of the national inquiry. What I have in mind, and this is the key point here, what I have in mind is something slightly different from a 7-year judge-led inquiry. Ideally, we would have something that got into local areas. It is a matter for Scotland to decide whether it would want to have some sort of relationship with the National Commission inquiry or whatever it ends up being called. But criminals move to wherever they can get their prey, and with the internet, they can do that even more quickly and easily. That is an issue internationally, not just between devolved nations. So I think it's important that there is some join up across certainly Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England on these sorts of issues. That is where my perhaps over-obsession on a nerd level with getting the IT right is a pragmatic way of joining up those systems. Given where we are, even I, with this ink pen, understand how easily that is now opposed to or even 2 or 3 years ago. So let's be absolutely clear here. What her point here was, she wanted to ensure that this was a proper national inquiry and that criminals couldn't just move from one jurisdiction or even devolved nation to another to escape the inquiry, to escape investigation, so that everything was all linked together. There was no opportunity for inquiry and investigation missed. What she did not say, in my interpretation, is that this should not be a judge-led inquiry. She said, word for word, she said, what I have in mind is something slightly different from a 7-year judge-led inquiry. What I understand she means is that each area would work together in some fashion so that this inquiry is a national investigation, but not just a very long, protracted investigation in the ordinary sense. Not that it shouldn't have a judge as somebody independent. And if I were in any doubt about that, I could come back to this document here, which made it absolutely expressly clear that it should indeed have somebody independent. Because the whole point for this question by Kemi Badenoch here, why does this not deserve a judge? A judge being someone independent and taking an independent approach to running it, to investigating it, calling for evidence, hearing evidence, controlling the evidence in the way that a judge would, because that is one of the judge's primary roles, controlling this in that way. So if I were in any doubt, I would refer back to the end of this executive summary here, where Baroness Casey said, as a result of this audit, I will insist that these cases, these women are looked into and not by those who are part of the problem. And therefore, it needs to be somebody independent. So if anything, you can infer from that it should be somebody completely detached and independent from the local area that is being blamed for the catastrophic failures locally and nationally and probably internationally as well. So that is my take on that. And jumping back to Roger Mear's article here, he quotes Nigel Farage, who held a press conference in London and said as follows: "This inquiry is dead in the water. Nearly 5 months have gone by, and what has happened? Nothing. They can't even agree on who the chair is going to be. Starmer tells us that Baroness Casey forbids it from being a judge," which obviously that's not true. "If you read the report carefully," he says, "you'll realise that simply isn't true," which is, of course, in common with very many of the things that he says, talking about Keir Starmer. Roger Mear here says, Farage's remarks confirm the same truth, that the Prime Minister lied. Rajamir then quite rightly talks about written or oral questions in Parliament, which obviously should be answered. And he says that there could be an oral question asking the Prime Minister to correct the record, such as, will the Prime Minister correct the record regarding his claim that Baroness Casey decided against a judge-led inquiry into grooming gangs, given that no such recommendation appears in her evidence or report, which I agree with. No such decision exists in that report or in her oral evidence. This, Rajamir says, forces an official answer. Ministers cannot simply ignore written questions. They must respond. Their reply is published in the official parliamentary record. If the Prime Minister refuses to correct himself, it turns a possible mistake into a deliberate act of deceit. An oral question during PMQs or Home Office session would compel a verbal response in front of the chamber and the cameras. That will become part of Hansard too. Could be a point of order and so on. So I'll link this below. But as I said at the outset of this video, it appears on the face of it that he's lied. Now, whether you take what he said as a bit of a liberal and vague and a broad interpretation of what Baroness Casey said is another matter. I don't believe that that's what she meant. She may come forward and say, yes, actually, that's what she meant. She meant to rule out a judge-led inquiry. I don't think that's what she meant. I think what she was talking about was the structure of the inquiry, how local areas worked together. She did not, in my view, rule out a judge-led inquiry. And I don't think that Keir Starmer should have said that she did. Because coming back once more to word for word what he said whether the inquiry should be judge-led was looked at by Louise Casey. She decided against that for a reason, and her reasons were twofold, and I'll spell them out. And then he talks about speed, and then he talks about not waiting till the criminal investigation has finished because he wanted to do them at the same time. That is not the same thing as whether or not it is judge-led. I don't think that's the case, and that is my interpretation. You are welcome to your own, but leave me your thoughts and comments below what you think about what's been said here. Now, all of this really should bear in mind that if they are putting the victims at the forefront of all this, as Baroness Casey said they should, bear in mind that 5 grooming gang victims have now quit the advisory panel, each of whom saying that they wanted this inquiry to be led by a judge, which now Downing Street has ruled out. So it really does make you question who they are listening to, what the priorities are, why they would not want an independent judge at the chair of this. The answer to which, I really don't know. I really don't know any justification to not have a judge involved in this. Having a judge lead this does not mean that it's going to be long, drawn out and take too many years and so on. That is not the cause of any delay and time frame. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do subscribe to the channel, as always, and thank you for watching.